Could you rank the elements currently and how you think they'll rank a year later? The biggest problem with ranking elements is, like, elements don't do anything in a vacuum, right? Elements don't exist in a vacuum. They exist in the context of the units of that element that exist, and how access to reactions and, like, artifact sets and everything based on those elements make it so that the developers make their numbers smaller or bigger to balance them accordingly. And so it's a very difficult question, right? When you're asking to rank elements, you kind of have to accept that elements aren't really something that's inherently rankable. And the reality is that power creep is kind of a problem right now, which means that elements that have had units, not you, released recently, are going to end up being better, because, well, the units they have are the units that were released lately that are very strong. This was my tier list the last time I did one of them, which was early Sumeru. The biggest changes since then, they have added a lot of sources of res shred outside of Anemo. Res shred is now something that's readily available for pretty much any team, even without using Anemo. Any team that uses VV can also use Shilonen. Almost, I guess. A bunch of them can use Sitlali. Some of them can use Chevreurs. You now have a lot more options for Res Shred, and Res Shred is not a stat that scales well with itself at all, right? As long as you have one source of Res Shred, getting a second one isn't that big of a deal. Which was a massive blow to the power of Anemo. On top of that, they've made Abysses a lot less AoE focused. This Abyss is an exception because of Yume Glorp release, but it will not stay like this. And they have just pretty significantly increased DPS requirements, which makes a lot of the teams without a dedicated hyper carry a bit weaker. It's harder for them to compete nowadays. And all of those things have made Anemo a lot worse. I'm not gonna change its ranking yet. I'm gonna go through all the elements and the changes they've gotten, and then we'll go through it. Next is Hydro. A lot has happened to Hydro since the time I did this. Nevidet happened, Farina happened, and the release of a lot of carries that don't work well with Singtel happened. Obviously, Nevidet and Farina release, pretty big deal. But also, they've started to release more and more units that rely on archetypes that don't necessarily need Hydro. Chevreurs is a unit that pretty much single-handedly made it so that pretty much every Electro character's best team now doesn't really use Hydro anymore, if you're using them as a carry. And she's also given a lot of Pyro characters competitive options that aren't Vape. More recently, the carries that did still have a lot of good Vape teams got some new Melt teams. Hydro as a supportive element is actually a lot worse than it was when I made this list. But Nevidet. And so, we'll have to see if it goes up or down. Dendro. Honestly, the biggest thing about Dendro is that it kind of didn't get any changes. Pretty much every other element got a lot of stuff going for them since I made this. Dendro kind of has stayed very stale, right? If you look at the Dendro units released since early Sumeru, right? Let's look at the Dendro units released since, like, Alhaitham, right? You had these, which gave you, like, additional defensive options for some of the Dendro teams that weren't using a Dendro like on-fielder. Outside of that, you've only gotten 2 Dendro characters, and these are characters you play with one another, but not with the other Dendros. And maybe sometimes just with non-Dendro characters, but whatever. And then for non-Dendro characters, how many of them work well in Dendro teams? Sethos? Behind to some extent. Farina for some of them, I guess, but... And is that it? That's kind of it, honestly. Mualani for burning, sure. But there just really hasn't been a lot of character releases that have done much for Dendro since I made this, since early Sumeru. It's not that Dendro got worse, it's that it's the element that gained... Like, no element gets worse with time. Unless they get, like, an actual nerf, which I don't think any element has ever really gotten. It's just that Dendro's the element that improved the least out of all the elements. Electro is probably the element that improved the second least. It got Shivers, which is obviously really nice. But that's kind of it. Like, it also got Kind, I guess. But what made Electro here previously was, in large part, Hyper Bloom. And, well, Hyper Bloom is not quite as broken anymore. It's still very good, don't get me wrong, but it's not nearly as broken as it used to be. Cryo... I mean, Citlali... Like, fuck. Citlali just... I don't even know, man. Citlali's kind of just fucking... yeah. Risley release was kind of inconsequential to Cryo. I do think he's better than the other Cryo carries, but I don't think that the difference is big enough to really justify much of an impact on Cryo. But Citlali, and even not just Citlali, like Citlali, but also Chaska and Mawika, even outside of Citlali teams, right, have made Melt real. Oh yeah, I guess Gumming release also happened since then. Okay. Gumming release was also kind of a big deal. But like, you'll notice that a lot of these are not Cryo units. And they didn't improve Cryo as a whole, they just improved Melt specifically. But the thing is, Pyro also got a lot of other stuff, right? Pyro is probably the one that got the most improved. It's either Pyro or Geo, right? Pyro got Mawika, Citlali, Chaska, Mualani, making forward vape teams real. I mean, fuck, even Kanich is reliant on Pyro. Gumming, Chevreuse, Arlecchino was released after the last time I did this. And then finally, Geo got Chiori, Kachina, but really they got Navia and Chilonen. I don't think Navia matters too much, but Chilonen is obviously pretty huge. Overall, I think Pyro goes all the way up, and Anemo goes down. I think Cryo goes a little bit up, and both Dendro and Electro go down. And I think Geo goes a lot up, but definitely not all the way up to here. P1 ranking vibes? True, actually. Now do Cryo without Citlali? Okay. The problem is, like, Citlali just really is that good. But I also think that Mawika, even without Citlali in Melt, like, her best teams are still Melt. And, like, it's gonna be an unpleasant experience, but, like, it's still good. But maybe we should do this. Maybe this is more accurate. Perhaps. Dendro down, not gonna lie. I don't think so.